January 2024. Alaska Airlines Flight 1182 climbs out of Portland at 16,000 feet. A door-sized panel tears off the side of the plane. Oxygen masks drop. A boy's shirt gets ripped off his body and pulled toward the hole. The jet was a Boeing 737 MAX 9. It had left the factory missing 4 bolts. For 60 years, an American company built the planes the whole world trusted. Now Boeing can't ship a jet without a congressional hearing. Meanwhile, a company barely 50 years old, built by governments that used to compete with each other, sells more airliners than Boeing does. Its name is Airbus. This is how America lost the sky. Rewind to 1958. Boeing rolls out the 707, the jet that turns air travel from a luxury into a habit. Then comes the 747, the jumbo jet so big that rivals call it impossible. Boeing engineers ran the company. The joke inside Boeing used to be, if it isn't built by Boeing, don't get on it. For decades, that wasn't arrogance. It was simply true. Boeing didn't just build planes, it set the rules the rest of the industry followed. Airlines didn't shop around. There was Boeing, and there was everyone else trying to catch up. Then 1997. Boeing buys its struggling rival McDonnell Douglas. On paper, Boeing swallowed the smaller company. In practice, McDonnell Douglas executives ended up running Boeing, and they brought a different philosophy with them. A plane is a financial product first, an engineering product second. Cut costs, please shareholders. Don't spend billions on a new airframe if you can squeeze one more decade out of an old one. Longtime Boeing engineers watched their influence over decisions quietly disappear. One line from that era stuck with people. It was less the engineers who won and more the accountants. That mindset would shape every major decision Boeing made for the next 25 years. While Boeing was absorbing that culture shift, Airbus was already reshaping the rules of the game. Airbus wasn't founded as a company chasing quarterly profit. It was created in 1970 by France and Germany, later joined by the UK and Spain as a government-backed answer to one problem. Europe had no airliner industry of its own, and Boeing had almost all of it. Airbus could lose money for years while it built up its planes because the governments behind it were willing to absorb the losses to build a strategic industry. Boeing had to answer to shareholders every quarter. For a long time, Airbus simply didn't. Airbus made one bet that changed everything. Every plane in the family should feel like the same plane. Starting with the 320 in the late 1980s, Airbus built its jets around fly-by-wire computers and cockpits that looked nearly identical across models. A pilot trained on a small A320 could convert to a bigger A330 in weeks, not months. For airlines, that meant cheaper training, easier crew scheduling, and lower costs year after year. Boeing's lineup, by contrast, was a patchwork of different eras stitched together. Airbus had planned for compatibility. Boeing had inherited history. By the 2010s, Airbus launched the 320neo, a fuel-efficient upgrade of its bestseller, and airlines lined up to order it. Boeing needed an answer fast. A clean-sheet replacement for the 737 would take a decade and cost billions no one wanted to spend. So Boeing chose the cheaper path, take an airframe designed in the 1960s and bolt on bigger, more efficient engines. The engines didn't fit under the wing the old way, so engineers mounted them further forward, which changed how the plane handled in flight. That physical change needed a software fix. That software fix was called MCAS. MCAS was designed to quietly push the nose down if the plane sensors thought it was climbing too steeply, to make the new engine placement feel like the old plane pilots already knew. The problem, Boeing didn't want to say much about it. More disclosure meant more training, and more training meant Boeing's biggest selling point, that pilots wouldn't need expensive simulator time, would disappear. So MCAS relied on a single sensor, and most pilots didn't know the system existed at all. In October 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 crashed into the Java Sea. A faulty sensor triggered MCAS, and the pilots fought a system they didn't know was fighting them. 189 people died. 5 months later, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 went down the same way. 157 more people died. Within days, regulators around the world grounded every 737 MAX on Earth. Not because of weather, not because of pilot error, because of a plane. It wasn't an isolated failure. A few years earlier, Boeing had gambled on the 787 Dreamliner, outsourcing huge chunks of the design and manufacturing to suppliers around the world to cut cost and risk. The plan backfired. Parts didn't fit together. Suppliers missed deadlines. The jet arrived years late, and once in service, its new lithium batteries caught fire on board, grounding the entire fleet again in 2013. The pattern was becoming clear. Every time Boeing tried to save money on the engineering side, the bill came due later in cash, in trust, or in lives. Inside Boeing, the warnings didn't stop. Quality engineers and whistleblowers said inspections were being rushed, and pressure to hit delivery numbers was overriding pressure to get things right. Boeing had also moved its headquarters away from its own factories, first to Chicago, later near Washington, D.C., physically distancing the executives who made the decisions from the engineers who built the planes. Critics described a company that had stopped listening to the people who actually knew how the metal went together. Which brings us back to that Alaska Airlines flight in January 2024. The door plug that blew out mid-flight wasn't a design flaw from the 1960s. It was a bolt that was never reinstalled after factory work, missed by Boeing's own quality checks. Regulators capped how many MAX jets Boeing was even allowed to build. Meanwhile, Airbus had already passed Boeing in yearly deliveries years earlier and never really looked back. The company built to catch up had become the one setting the pace. Boeing didn't lose the sky to a smarter rival overnight. It lost it decade by decade, one cost-cutting decision at a time, choosing shareholders over engineers until the difference became impossible to hide. The real question isn't whether Airbus is winning. It's whether Boeing can remember how to build a plane the way it used to. Subscribe to find out what happens next.